Our capstone presentation today is by Ms. Lucy Drozda, and this is her thesis statement. The act of escaping through engagement of the imagination by mediums of fancy can have a positive impact on one's mind and soul by offering relaxation and a knowledge and desire for that which is good. Please welcome Lucy.
When one hears the word escapism, it often comes with a negative connotation. Many associate this word with fleeing reality, avoiding one's responsibilities, and seeking only pleasure and comfort. However, escapism in and of itself is not inherently good or evil. Merriam-Webster defines escapism as the habitual diversion of the mind to purely imaginative activity or entertainment as an escape from reality or routine. While the phrase escape from reality may still elicit a negative reaction from many, this escape is not always an abandonment of reality. In fact, it can often be more so a seeking of temporary solace or refuge. In his essay on fairy stories, Tolkien defends literary escapism, saying, "Why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home? Or if, when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls? The world outside has not become less real because the prisoner cannot see it." In using escape in this way, the critics have chosen the wrong word, and what is more, they are confusing, not always by sincere error, the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter. Here, Tolkien explains the difference between what may be called beneficial or healthy escapism and negative or harmful escapism, the former being the escape of the prisoner, seeking freedom and refuge, and the latter being the flight of the deserter, abandoning responsibilities for pleasure. A healthy engagement with escapism through imaginative activity, particularly that of the narrative arts, is beneficial both in relation to mental and physical well-being and in gaining a greater understanding of reality, goodness, and beauty. Healthy practices of escapism have been shown to aid mental health by alleviating stress and improving one's mood. One survey-based study found that open-world games, characterized by their expansive, detailed environments and non-linear gameplay, can significantly reduce stress. The study attributed this effect to the immersive nature of these games, which gave the players a sense of entering a different world. Based on these results, one may conclude that other activities with similar immersive natures may also alleviate stress. This stress relief occurs because the practice of escapism allows one to take his mind off of what is causing his stress, giving the brain a chance to reset. The buildup of daily stressors, which are inescapable in life, can have devastating effects if left unchecked. This is because the body's automatic nervous system, or ANS, is composed of two primary branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic ANS kicks the body into fight or flight mode as a defense from danger, while the parasympathetic ANS soothes the body afterwards. If stress is not managed well, it can keep the parasympathetic ANS from kicking in, inhibiting relaxation. If the situation becomes chronic, it can lead to other issues such as feelings of irritability, anxiety, and depression. Effects from daily stressors can harm not only one's mental health, but their physical health as well. As important as it is to have a method of healthy escape and relaxation, it is equally as vital to ensure that the activity does not become harmful. Heavy reliance on escapism can become a continuous vicious cycle that can worsen underlying mental health issues. If one uses escape to avoid feelings of depression or anxiety without addressing the root cause, it can exacerbate the problem because he now relies too heavily on escapism to feel happy. Consequently, he may struggle to find happiness elsewhere. Moreover, activities involving addictive substances such as drugs and alcohol, as well as prolonged exposure to screens, are often harmful and have strong negative consequences. Overall, it is important that one is prudent when determining what activities he chooses to escape stress, as different people may be more susceptible to a certain activity becoming harmful. This is why it is useful to discuss some conventional methods for engaging in healthy escapism if it seems as though an activity may lead to addiction or other negative consequences. Hooked on Hope Mental Health Center provides several suggestions for balancing stress relief through escapism while avoiding harmful habits. These include considering the mode of escapism based on its purpose, whether the goal of the activity is temporary disengagement or persistent avoidance, its pattern, the frequency and duration of the activity, and its impact, the after effects of the activity on the person and his mental state. While these conventional tips are useful to keep in mind, healthy escapism is affected by the content of the activity itself. This aspect is more difficult to analyze, so it is helpful to have a guide in this process of discernment. This is where the transcendentals become relevant for understanding escapism, as they offer a guideline for filtering out what is harmful and discerning what is good. In order to ascertain whether or not the content of an escapist activity is healthy or harmful, one ought to determine how it relates to the categories of truth, goodness, and beauty. Let's begin with the idea of truth. When viewing escapism through the lens of the transcendental truth, one must examine how it affects one's perception of reality. Many see escapist stories and activities as pointless because fantastical stories do not reflect reality. However, it is possible that a story does not need to reflect a purely physical reality to express deeper truths. Fantastical myths have been told for centuries, from the ancient Greek Odyssey to the early medieval Beowulf, to the more modern tales like The Lord of the Rings. Great works like these are not appreciated throughout centuries and considered timeless because they hold no meaning. The societal impact of these escapist stories demonstrate the fact that fiction and fantasy can express truth in a unique and irreplaceable way. For this reason, when preaching to his disciples, Jesus chose to speak to them through parables, so that they may better understand the truth of his teachings. Although stories and parables may not directly portray a physical reality, truth can be understood, sometimes more clearly, when one has to uncover it himself. Next, we will turn to the idea of goodness and its relation to escapism. We know from the first chapter of the book of Genesis that there is an inherent goodness in creation, for Scripture says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Humans made in the image and likeness of God are themselves creators, and can share in the goodness of God by participating in creation. In fact, both creators and receivers of art, be it in the narrative arts or any other form, participate in this goodness. In Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, he refers to writers as sub-creators, because through their stories they create secondary worlds into which the reader or consumer enters. By engaging with these worlds, one can participate in the shared goodness of creation. Finally, we turn to the third measure for determining healthy escapism, which asks if the mode of escapism demonstrates the transcendental beauty. Many often neglect the importance and even necessity of beauty for human flourishing. However, beauty instills joy in the beholder and draws him to God, acting as a bridge between the physical and the divine. When escapist content reflects the beauty of humanity and nature, it encourages the consumer to be a witness to that beauty, both as an observer and a participant. Beauty found in fiction does not diminish beauty found in life. Rather, it magnifies certain aspects of creation, allowing one to more easily notice and appreciate those aspects as they are encountered. C.S. Lewis also describes this, saying that fairy tales, far from dulling or emptying the actual world, give it a new dimension of depth. One does not despise real woods because he has read of enchanted woods. The reading makes all real woods a little enchanted. Because human creativity draws from divine creativity, the beauty found in human-made narratives can draw people toward the beauty of God and his creation. In conclusion, escapism through imaginative fiction can not only benefit the mind and body through relaxation, but it can instill an understanding and desire for the transcendentals, which are the pathway to the divine. Fairy stories, as Tolkien calls them, can awaken in the soul a desire for something greater through their portrayal of truth, goodness, and beauty. C.S. Lewis describes this effect, saying that fairyland arouses a longing for he knows not what. It stirs and troubles him to his lifelong enrichment with the dim sense of something beyond his reach. This restlessness drives us to look beyond the material things of this world, which become our jailers and prison walls, and to try to get out and go home, to a place of perfection beyond our imagination, where in the end we long to escape to.
So we'll start with some faculty questions. So we'll let the faculty members that are here ask some questions if they have them for you.
Thanks, Lucy. I'm going to stay seated. We don't have a podium for the teachers. I am wondering about the specific works that you mentioned when you talked about the transcendental of truth. So you talked about the Odyssey and Beowulf and the Lord of the Rings. Some of those are in the curriculum, some you obviously read for pleasure. But could you elaborate on what aspects of truth, maybe in one of those, you see that have implications for the real world?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think that, well, one of the main things that I see personally in a lot of stories is the characters and how they portray like humanity, and I think it can show like the truth about like human nature in the stories.
Thank you.
Miss Lise?
Thank you, Lucy. I got to see some of the behind the scenes works in this project, and so I wanted to know if you could share with all of us kind of inspiration for this project, and perhaps if there are any unexpected turns when you brought this project to completion in terms of like the ideas you had.
Thank you for your question. The inspiration for this project really came from that first Tolkien quote about the prisoner. And when I saw that, it just like gave me the idea, and it really like spoke to me because I know like I love fiction and like fantasy, and it was really an interesting topic to look into. And I ended up going with like analyzing it through the transcendentals, which was something that I decided to do a little bit later in the process.
Thank you.
So I wondered if, so this idea of escapism, does it require like an intentional act for it to be called as healthy escapism instead of the harmful kind? I guess another way to ask is like, do I have to intentionally choose to escape for it to be healthy? Or can it be like a learned response or like a natural response to something and still be a healthy escapism?
Thank you for your question. I think there can be a certain healthy aspect in just, like I mentioned, like relaxing, and I think that's something that will just happen. But I do think that the more intentional you are about it, the more that you can get out of it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I know you're an artist, and so I'm wondering a little bit about the role, maybe if you've thought of the role of illustration or of like depicting fantasy worlds, either as a reader or just for the benefit of other readers. Yeah, can you maybe think about that in the context of what you're talking about with imaginative fiction? Sure. Okay. So I guess the way I'm thinking about it is, do you think that illustrations are a helpful component of this sort of escapism, or do they potentially limit it in any way?
Thank you for your question. I do think that illustrations are useful and like play their own part, but there's also in so when I was writing this, I read a lot of C.S. Lewis's essays, and he talked about the artist specifically choosing the medium that they wrote the story in. When he was thinking about writing the Chronicles of Narnia, he wasn't thinking first that he was going to write a children's story. He thought about the story and then chose that medium to tell it in. And I think that in the literature, that is the medium that the artist chose to portray that. And so, to a certain degree, that like should be respected. But I do think that illustrations can be helpful to some degree in expanding on that if they like inspire the reader to illustrate something.
Thank you.
Doctor.
That quote that put into the thing, which was really provocative for me, the idea that reading about enchanted forests make real forest that much more enchanting. So I guess this may be more of a yes or no question. Is part of what you're saying that can make escapism sort of not just healthy but beneficial, getting us in touch with the unseen, with maybe the deeper truths of the world? Is part of your idea that reading certain kinds of fiction doesn't just re-enchant the world, but it shows us that the world is an enchanted place? Does that make sense?
Yes, I do believe that. I've heard people say things like, oh, sometimes we wish we lived in a fairy tale world, but we don't realize just how like almost magical this world is. And I think that fairy stories can help us see just how beautiful that the world is.
Thank you.
Okay, so there aren't a lot of listeners today, but imagine that we have kind of a full audience. If someone's inspired by what you're saying and wants to kind of get started, but hasn't been a fan of fantasy as a drama, as a genre, could you recommend some stories or other mediums of fantasy to help me get started on this exploration of escapism?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I would always recommend The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis and The Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien. I think those two writers really, especially Tolkien, kind of defined fantasy and what it is today. So I would definitely recommend those.
Okay, although we don't have any current seniors in the room, we have some former seniors in the room. So if you have our former seniors have any questions for Lucy, you can ask a question this time if you'd like to. Okay, thank